All right, so this, we'll pretend, is the sketch that I chose from my 4 sketches. So hopefully you should be here, you submitted your 4 sketches, you've picked one to move on with. This is the one that I have picked to move on with. So you're gonna pick your final sketch, decide which one you're gonna do, this is it. Now, you need to decide, is this sketch laid out how I want it to be, or do I need to redraw it on another piece of paper? So maybe you picked this idea, but you need to like clean up some details first. If you need to, that's fine. Flip to a new page in your sketchbook, draw it again. Either way, it'll be fine. But if you're fine with the way that this one is and you're ready to move on with it, that's also fine. I feel like I've said fine like 12 times already. So you're going to get a pencil and you are going to trace the lines as hard as you possibly can. So I'm gonna go in here, everything that is going to be a line, I am going to trace as hard as I can. And I'm not even really worried about keeping my lines neat. Like they're gonna get a little bit messy looking, that's fine. If you have details that are so tiny that if you made them this hard, they would disappear, you were never going to be able to carve those in the first place. You don't need to trace the border of your box because you're going to cut it out here in a minute. But if it's going to bother you to not trace it, you can trace it. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to hurt you. It's just not going to help you either. This is the border of my box. This is a secondary border that I have created for my artwork, so I am going to trace that. So everything that I'm tracing hard is what's going to transfer. I don't really want these specific stars to transfer. This was just to kind of like give the idea of what I was doing back there. I'm not super worried about these like exact stars in this exact placement, so I'm not going to trace those. Same thing here, like I just meant this to indicate that the planet was going to have like some texture up here. I don't need these specific lines, so I'm not going to worry about that. But the overall shapes and everything, especially if you have words in your design, if you have words written across here, you need to make sure to trace those because you need to transfer your words, because everything you transfer is going to be backwards, as you're going to see here in a minute, and then it's going to end up being forwards when you print your final design. So if you have words, you need to put them on here the right way so that they will transfer the wrong way so that they will print the right way. I know that doesn't make any sense, but you'll see it in the end. So make sure if you're doing words to get them on your transfer sketch. So once I'm ready, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and that's going to make it a lot easier to transfer. Okay, so I have my block and I have my design. They are the same size because I traced this to make this. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put my design graphite side down. So I'm going to flip it over onto the back like this, and I'm going to kind of line it up like this. Some people like to tape it. The only problem with taping it is that it will not stick to the linoleum. The linoleum is just not, it's too like powdery feeling. So you can kind of like tape it to the table if you need to, if that helps you, whatever you want to do. But basically you're going to get something. I'm going to use this pen. You could use your pencil. You could use highlighters or markers or anything like that, but you're basically going to start going like this, and you're trying to get your design that you made to transfer, because you just put a lot of extra graphite on the front of that design, and you're trying to get that graphite to stick to the linoleum block. The only thing you really want to be careful of, if you're using a pencil, make sure it's not too sharp, because you don't want it to tear your paper, and you also don't want it to leave dents in your linoleum, because that could potentially happen. Okay, so without taking my paper off, I'm just gonna kind of lift up the corner and see how it's doing. It's transferring great, to be honest. It's even transferring some of just like this scribbles that I did back here. See how it's doing over here. Okay, so you can see this I missed, so I'm gonna go back and get that. If you just assume that it went well and take this paper off, you're never going to get it lined back up right. So keep one hand down, kind of lift up, see how it did, see if there's anything else that needs to be fixed, and then I'm happy with that, so I'm gonna do that. If you needed to make some changes with pencils now, you could go in here, you can draw on the linoleum, you could erase it decently. But if you are ready for the next step, the next thing you're gonna do is go in with a Sharpie. I gave you a Sharpie, so you should still have that. If you don't still have that, you'll need to buy yourself one. It's totally fine if you want to go to the Dollar Tree and buy an off-brand Sharpie for this. It's not super duper important that it's a name brand Sharpie. And sometimes you can kind of revive them, but they pick up some of like this powdery surface of the linoleum and they get kind of weird. I don't really know why. But anyway, so I'm going to go in with my Sharpie and I'm going to look at my original design and I'm going to figure out what needs, oh, also, while we're here, see how this is backwards? This guy was over here, now he's over here. This planet was over here, now it's over here, and the whole planet is flipped as well. Everything's gonna be backwards. If I had words on here, they would be backwards on here, and that's exactly how they're supposed to be. They are supposed to be backwards. Everything should be backwards. That's how we want it to be. Even though you're like, oh no, my words are backwards, you can't read them. You're gonna be able to read them in the end. So it should be backwards. Don't be like, oh, Miss Fortune, mine's wrong, it's backwards. No, it's right because it's backwards, promise. So I'm gonna go with my Sharpie and everything that I want to be black in my final design, I'm gonna color black with my Sharpie. And I'm not trying to get it like perfectly solid or anything like that. I'm just trying to like give myself a little bit of a guide so that I remember what needs to be carved and what needs to not be carved. And again, this is everything that I want to be black in my final design. I am coloring black with a Sharpie. There is always one kid who does it backwards and colors the white stuff black and then leaves the, I don't know why. Just don't let that kid be you. You see how my Sharpie's starting to get yucky? Sometimes if it does that, you can kind of like come over here and kind of like scribble all the way around it and it'll kind of revive it a little bit. It's a little bit better. And again, I'm not worrying too much about those stars. That's gonna be something that I put in. It is more important if you are planning on leaving little black details. That's super important. So like I would put those in there. But if you're planning on putting in little white details, you can add those at any time. But if I, similar to with the scratch boards, if I carved this whole thing out and didn't leave those black details in there, there would be no way of going back and putting them in. You can add white at any time. You cannot add black. So make sure to get all of the black details in because that's gonna be important to remember. The stars, I will go in very last thing and put those in. Okay, so here is my final design. I have colored black everything that I want to stay black so that way I remember. And I have left white everything that I want to be white, again, so that I remember. So now I am ready to carve.